A single misplaced diamond necklace, a billionaire's roaring accusation in a room filled with flashing cameras. A black maid's life, her dignity, and her future all destroyed in an instant. This isn't a story about a simple misunderstanding. It's the story of Vincent Caldwell, a man who had everything but could see nothing, and Brenda Jackson, the woman who had nothing but held a universe of secrets in her silence. It's a story about how the most devastating public mistake can lead to the most profound private discovery, and how true regret is measured not in words, but in the desperate, frantic race against time to right an unforgivable wrong. Stay with us as we unravel the story that shattered a gilded empire and rebuilt a family's hope from the ashes of a lie. Vincent Caldwell lived his life by a set of immutable laws, the chief among them being that efficiency was the purest form of elegance. His world was a symphony of polished chrome-hushed phone calls and numbers that danced to his command on a dozen screens in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park. As the CEO of Caldwell Capital, he hadn't just inherited wealth, he had weaponized it, turning a respectable family fortune into a global financial empire through sheer, unadulterated ruthlessness. He could predict the shift of the Nikkei index with more accuracy than he could predict the mood of his own daughter. His home, a sprawling limestone mansion on the Upper East Side, was less a home and more a museum to his success, and a mausoleum to his late wife Carolyn. Every surface was sterile, every flower arrangement geometrically perfect, every staff member trained to be a whisper, a shadow. They moved through the cavernous rooms with a practiced invisibility, their primary function to erase any evidence of human messiness. Among these shadows was Brenda Jackson. In her early 40s, she had a quiet dignity that seemed out of place against the cold marble and impersonal art. Unlike the other staff who scurried with their eyes downcast, Brenda moved with a deliberate, almost serene grace. She polished the silver with hands that were firm yet gentle. She arranged the linens with a precision that bordered on art, and when she cleaned the master suite, she treated the lingering scent of Caroline's perfume on the vanity not as dust to be wiped away, but as a memory to be respected. Vincent rarely noticed her. To him she was simply the maid, a recurring expense on the household budget, an efficient cog in the machine that kept his life running smoothly. He didn't know she had a son. He didn't know she took 3 different buses to get to his mansion every morning before the sun rose. He didn't know that before she put on her simple black uniform, she had been a pediatric nurse, her career cut short by a tragedy that had sent her life spiraling in a direction she never imagined. The centerpiece of Vincent's life, if one could call it that, was the annual Caldwell Foundation Gala for Children's Health. It was the one night a year he played the part of the benevolent philanthropist. In reality, it was a brutal display of power, a networking event masquerading as charity. This year's gala was particularly important. It was the first one since Carolyn had passed away from a sudden illness 2 years prior. Vincent was determined to make it a monument to her memory, which meant it had to be flawless. The crown jewel of the event was the silent auction's main prize, the Star of Caroline, a breathtaking sapphire and diamond necklace he had commissioned for his wife on their 10th anniversary. It was her most cherished possession. Putting it up for auction was a calculated move, a painful but powerful gesture that would surely drive donations through the roof. The day before the gala, Vincent was in his dressing room, a space the size of a small apartment, barking orders into his phone. He paced impatiently his reflection, striding alongside him in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors. Brenda was in the room quietly dusting the ornate woodwork. No, absolutely not, Vincent snapped into his phone. The seating arrangement is final. I don't care if Mr. Dubois feels slighted. His portfolio has underperformed for 2 quarters. He can sit by the kitchen. He ended the call without a goodbye. His eyes scanned the room, looking for imperfections. They landed on the velvet-lined display case on his dresser, where the star of Caroline was supposed to be. It was empty. A cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Brenda, who had been focused on her work, turned slightly startled. "So the necklace, the star of Caroline. It was right here." He pointed at the empty case. Brenda's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't been near his dresser. "I don't know, sir. I have not touched anything on your dresser. I only just came in to dust." Vincent's gaze narrowed. He saw not a person, but a variable and unknown element in his perfectly controlled equation. "Search the room," he commanded, as if she were a soldier and he a general. They both looked Vincent with a frantic accusatory energy, Brenda with a calm, methodical approach. It was nowhere. It wasn't in the drawers behind the dresser or in the adjoining bathroom. It had vanished. "Someone has been in this room," Vincent declared, his voice turning to ice. He looked directly at Brenda. She was the only one there, the only variable. In his world of numbers and probabilities, she was the most likely answer. "Sir, I would never—" Brenda began, her voice steady, despite the accusation hanging in the air. "That's what they all say." He cut her off, his mind already calculating the fallout. The PR disaster, the humiliation, the stain on Caroline's memory. He couldn't see the woman in front of him, her honest eyes, the slight tremble in her hands. He could only see a problem that needed to be eliminated. The gala was tomorrow. The necklace was gone, and she was the only one in the room. The next 24 hours were a storm of controlled chaos. Vincent had his private security team, led by a former Mossad agent named Avi, conduct a discreet internal search. They swept the mansion, interviewed the staff, and reviewed the limited security footage. Nothing. The necklace had simply evaporated. Avi suspected a professional jobber guest from a previous event, perhaps. But Vincent's mind remained anchored on the simplest explanation, the person in the room. He couldn't shake the image of Brenda's face, her brief moment of surprise. To his suspicious mind, it looked like guilt. He made a decision. The auction would proceed. He would announce the necklace had been secured off-site and would be delivered to the winner. A lie, but a necessary one to save face. Beneath his calm exterior, however, a cold rage simmered. The violation felt deeply personal, an attack on Caroline's legacy. The night of the gala arrived. The Caldwell mansion was transformed. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in flowers cascaded from balconies, and a river of champagne flowed freely. New York's elite, a glittering constellation of old money-tech billionaires and political figures, drifted through the grand ballroom, their laughter echoing off the frescoed ceilings. Vincent played his part perfectly. He was the stoic, grieving husband, the powerful philanthropist. He shook hands, accepted condolences for his loss, and delivered a moving speech about Caroline's passion for helping children. But his eyes were like a hawk's, scanning the crowd, scanning his staff. He had instructed Avi to keep a particularly close watch on Brenda Jackson, who, against his initial impulse to fire her on the spot, was still working the event. Avi had advised it. Firing her now would look suspicious. "Let her think she's in the clear," he'd said. She might make a mistake. Brenda moved through the glittering throng with her usual quiet efficiency, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. But tonight there was a tension in her shoulders. She could feel Vincent's eyes on her. She felt the weight of his suspicion like a physical shroud. Every time she passed a security guard, she felt their gaze linger. It was a humiliating, terrifying ordeal, but she needed this job. She couldn't afford to walk away, not now. The main auction began. Bids soared into the millions for exotic trips and priceless art. Then came the final item, the Star of Caroline. A large screen displayed a high-resolution photo of the magnificent necklace. The bidding was furious, a testament to Caroline's memory and Vincent's influence. It finally sold for an astonishing $5.2 million to a shipping magnate from Greece. As the applause subsided, Vincent felt a vibration in his pocket. A text from Avi. Master bedroom. Now, I have her. A primal surge of vindication shot through him. He excused himself from the stage and moved swiftly through the private corridors of the mansion, his heart pounding with a cold, triumphant fury. He entered the master suite. Avi was standing there, his arms crossed, blocking the entrance to Caroline's walk-in closet. From inside, Vincent could hear a faint rustling. She was in the private wing. I followed her, Avi said in his low, gravelly voice. This was it. The ultimate betrayal. Stealing was one thing, but to do it during the gala, to sneak into his late wife's most sacred space, the audacity was staggering. Vincent pushed past Avi and threw open the closet doors, and there was Brenda. She was on her knees, half hidden behind a row of Carolina's evening gowns. Her back was to him. In her hand, shimmering under the soft closet light, was the Star of Caroline. She was holding it, her fingers tracing the large sapphire at its center. The sight broke something in Vincent. The grief, the stress, the paranoia, it all coalesced into a singular explosive point of white-hot rage. He didn't see a woman who looked lost or scared. He saw a thief caught red-handed, defiling the memory of his wife. He didn't think. He reacted. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip like iron, and hauled her to her feet. The necklace clattered to the floor. "What do you think you are doing?" He snarled, his voice, a low growl that barely contained its violence. Brenda gasped, her eyes wide, with a mixture of terror and something else he couldn't decipher. "Mr. Caldwell, please. It's not what you think. I found it. I was bringing it back in my wife's closet during the gala." "Do you take me for a fool?" He was dragging her now out of the closet, through the master suite, his mind a tempest. He wasn't just going to fire her, he was going to make an example of her. He pulled her out of the private wing and into the main upstairs hallway, which overlooked the grand ballroom below. A few guests on their way to the restrooms turned to stare. The commotion was drawing attention. "Sir, please, you have to listen to me," Brenda pleaded, trying to pull her arm free. Her voice was desperate. "I can explain everything." But Vincent was beyond listening. He was on a warpath. He dragged her to the top of the grand staircase. Below, the music had faltered. Hundreds of faces, a sea of the rich and powerful, were turning to look up. The room fell into a stunned, collective silence. Camera flashes from the press section began to pop like fireflies. Standing at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of cold fury, Vincent Caldwell held his maid's arm in a death grip and prepared to deliver his verdict in front of the entire world. This woman, he boomed his voice, amplified by the cavernous space, who has worked in my home, who has enjoyed my trust, is a thief. A collective gasp went through the crowd. She has been caught tonight in my late wife's private chambers, with the very necklace we just auctioned in Caroline's memory. He continued, his voice dripping with venom. He didn't look at Brenda, at the tears now streaming down her face, at the utter desolation in her eyes. "Brenda Jackson," he said, finally turning to her, making sure everyone could see her shame. "You are fired. Get out of my house. Security will escort you out. And you can be sure my lawyers will be in touch." He released her arm with a shove. Brenda stumbled back, catching herself on the railing. The world swam before her eyes. The hundreds of staring faces, the relentless pop of the cameras, Vincent's face twisted in righteous anger. It was a nightmare. She opened her mouth to speak to defend herself, but no sound came out. A single choked sob escaped her lips. Humiliated, shattered, and utterly alone, she was flanked by 2 security guards, who led her not down the grand staircase of judgment, but away through the staff corridors to be discarded like common trash. Vincent Caldwell stood tall, watching her go, feeling a grim satisfaction. He had protected his wife's honor. He had excised the poison from his house. He had no idea he had just made the biggest mistake of his entire life. In the immediate aftermath, Vincent felt a surge of righteousness. He had acted decisively. He had defended Caroline's memory. The guests murmured with a mixture of shock and sympathy for the poor, wronged billionaire. The gala, despite the dramatic interruption, was deemed a success, the story of the thieving maid adding a sordid but compelling chapter to the night's events. The headlines the next day were exactly what he expected. Caldwell's justice philanthropist exposes thief at charity gala. But as the adrenaline faded, a strange and unwelcome feeling began to creep into the edges of his consciousness. It wasn't regret, not yet. It was something more like dissonance, an equation that didn't quite balance. Brenda's face in that final moment, it wasn't the face of a defiant criminal caught in the act. It was the face of utter soul-crushing despair. The first thread in the tapestry of his certainty was pulled by his daughter Olivia. Olivia Caldwell, at 20, was a stark contrast to her father. Where he was sharp angles and cold logic, she was soft curves and thoughtful silence. She was studying art history at Columbia and possessed an emotional intelligence that Vincent found both baffling and at times irritating. She had loved her mother deeply, and in the 2 years since Caroline's death had navigated her own grief by trying to preserve the warmth and kindness her mother had embodied. She had a fondness for Brenda. She'd often find reasons to be in the kitchen when Brenda was on her break, asking her questions that went beyond polite employer-employee chatter. She knew Brenda's favorite type of tea, and knew that she sometimes hummed gospel hymns under her breath when she thought no one was listening. The Brenda she knew simply didn't align with the picture of the calculating thief her father had painted. The morning after the gala, Olivia found her father in his study. The papers with the blaring headlines were spread across his mahogany desk. "Father," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't believe she did it." Vincent looked up from a market report, his expression one of weary impatience. "Olivia, it's over." She was caught with the necklace in her hand. "In your mother's closet. There is nothing to discuss." "That's what doesn't make sense," Olivia persisted, stepping closer. "If she was a professional thief, why would she be so clumsy? Why hide in the most obvious place? And why would she have the necklace on her during the party? She'd have stolen it and gotten it out of the house days ago." Criminals are often arrogant and foolish, Vincent dismissed. Her greed got the better of her. "And what about Penelope Van Doren?" Olivia asked, her voice dropping slightly. Vincent frowned. What about her? Penelope was a socialite, the daughter of an old family friend whose fortune had been steadily dwindling for a decade. She was known for her lavish lifestyle, which far outstripped her actual income. "I saw her," Olivia said, "earlier in the evening near the private wing. She looked frantic, upset. She bumped into me and barely apologized before rushing off. It was strange." Vincent waved his hand. "Penelope is always frantic. It's her natural state." "This is a distraction, Olivia. Let it go." But Olivia couldn't let it go. Her intuition, a trait she inherited from her mother, was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. While her father buried himself in work, Olivia began her own quiet investigation. She started with the other staff. She spoke to Maria, the head housekeeper who had trained Brenda. Brenda Maria said, her brow furrowed. "No, never. She is the most honest person I know. She once found a $50 bill on the floor of the laundry room and spent an hour trying to figure out whose pocket it fell from. Steal a $5 million necklace? It is not in her soul." She then spoke to Robert, one of the younger security guards who had been monitoring the cameras. He was nervous talking to her, but Olivia's gentle nature put him at ease. The main camera in the upstairs corridor was glitchy that night, Miss Caldwell, he admitted hesitantly. It was cutting in and out. Mr. Avi was angry about it. "We have a blind spot of about 90 seconds right around the time the incident happened. A blind spot." That was interesting. Olivia's most crucial conversation was with her father's security chief, Avi. She found him in the security office, a high-tech bunker in the mansion's sub-basement. "Avi," she said, getting straight to the point, "I want to see the footage from the moment you spotted Brenda to the moment my father confronted her." Avi, loyal to his employer, was reluctant. "Miss Caldwell, the matter is closed. Avi, my mother, trusted you to protect our family. That means protecting us from making terrible mistakes too. Please." Her appeal to his history with Caroline worked. He sighed and replayed the footage. They watched in silence as the camera showed Brenda walking not stealthily, but purposefully, down the upstairs hall toward the master suite. She seemed to be looking for someone, her head turning from side to side. Then she paused, looked down, and bent over to pick something up from the floor just at the edge of the frame. The object was small and glittered. She looked at it in her hand for a moment, her eyes wide, and then she immediately ducked into the nearest room, which happened to be the master suite. "Wait," Olivia said, pointing at the screen. "Rewind that." The blind spot. When was it Avi checked the logs? Just before this. The camera came back online, 20 seconds before you see her walk into the frame. So someone could have come out of the master suite during that blind spot, dropped the necklace, and disappeared down the hall, Olivia theorized. It is possible Avi conceded his professional curiosity now piqued. He hadn't considered this angle. He had been operating on Vincent's certainty. But why would she take it into the closet? Why not just bring it directly to one of us? Panic, Olivia whispered, the pieces clicking into place. She finds a multi-million-dollar necklace on the floor. She knows my father already suspects her. She doesn't know who to trust. She hears people coming. Her first instinct is to hide it, to secure it somewhere safe, until she can figure out what to do. What's the safest, most private place in that sweet mother's closet? It was a plausible theory, but it was just that, a theory. Olivia needed more. She needed to know why Brenda was so desperate for this job in the first place, why she would endure the humiliation and suspicion without simply quitting. The answer, she suspected, did not lie within the cold marble walls of the mansion. It lay in Brenda Jackson's world, a world her father had never bothered to imagine even existed. Armed with Brenda's address from the employee files, Olivia Caldwell made a decision. She was going to cross the river into a part of the city her father only ever saw from his helicopter and find the truth for herself. The address led Olivia to a modest fourth-floor walk-up apartment in a neighborhood that stood in stark, gritty contrast to her own. Here the air was thick with the scent of street food and exhaust fumes, and the soundtrack was a cacophony of sirens, distant music, and children's laughter. As Olivia climbed the worn linoleum steps, her heart pounded with a nervous uncertainty. What would she say? What could she possibly offer? An apology felt insultingly inadequate. She knocked on the door of apartment 4B. After a long moment, the door opened a crack held by a security chain. Brenda Jackson's face appeared in the gap, her eyes red-rimmed and hollowed out with exhaustion, widened in shock when she saw who it was. "Ms. Caldwell, what are you doing here?" Brenda's voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual calm. "Brenda, please," Olivia said, her own voice unsteady. "Can I just talk to you for a few minutes? I'm so sorry about what happened." Brenda stared at her for a long moment, her expression a mixture of distrust and utter weariness. Finally, with a heavy sigh, she unlatched the chain and opened the door. The apartment was small and impeccably clean, but it was dominated by an atmosphere of quiet crisis. The main room served as a living area and a bedroom. In the corner next to a window with a view of a brick wall was a hospital-grade bed. Lying in the bed, looking pale and frail, was a young boy of about 10, his head bald from chemotherapy. He was hooked up to an IV drip stand and a quiet beeping monitor. Olivia stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. The carefully constructed theory in her mind suddenly crashed into a brutal, heart-breaking reality. "This is my son, David." Brenda said, her voice soft but heavy as stone. She walked over to the bed and gently brushed a stray hair from his forehead. "He's sleeping now. The last round of treatment was hard on him." Olivia felt a wave of shame so profound it was dizzying. She and her father had been agonizing over a piece of jewelry while this woman was fighting for her child's life. What is his diagnosis?" Olivia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Acute myeloid leukemia." Brenda replied, her back still to Olivia. "A very aggressive form. He had a relapse 3 months ago. The doctors say his only real chance is a bone marrow transplant. We've been on the global registry for months, but he has a rare blood type. Finding a match is difficult." Every word was a blow to Olivia's conscience. Suddenly, Brenda's desperation to keep her job, her tolerance of Vincent's coldness, her silence in the face of accusation, it all made a terrible kind of sense. "The medical bills," Olivia began. Brenda finally turned to face her, a bitter, humorless smile on her lips. "The bills are astronomical. My insurance from my old job ran out. Your father's household policy is decent, but it barely covers the cost of his medication, let alone the experimental treatments we've been trying. The job at your house, it was the only thing keeping us afloat. The only thing giving me access to that insurance." She gestured around the small room. "This is it. This is our whole world." She sank into a worn armchair, the fight seeming to drain out of her. "I was a pediatric oncology nurse for 15 years at New York Presbyterian," she said, her voice distant. "I held the hands of children like my David. I comforted their parents. I told them to have hope. Then my husband, a firefighter, died in a warehouse collapse 3 years ago. A few months later, David got sick. I had to quit my job to care for him full-time, used up all our savings, went through my husband's life insurance, and eventually I had to take a job cleaning for people who have more money in their sofa cushions than I have to my name, all to keep my son alive." The story hung in the air, thick with injustice. Olivia finally understood. "The necklace," Brenda Olivia said gently. "Tell me what really happened." Brenda took a deep, shuddering breath. "Your father's suspicion. It started the day before, when the necklace first went missing. I felt his eyes on me all night at the gala. I was terrified of doing one wrong thing. During the auction, I was taking a tray back to the kitchen when I saw Mrs. Van Doren." Penelope. She came hurrying out of the hallway leading from the private wing. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. She didn't even see me. As she passed, something fell from her clutch bag. It was the necklace. Brenda paused, reliving the moment. I gasped. She didn't hear me. She just kept going. I picked it up. My first thought was just relief. That it was found. My name would be cleared. I turned to go find your father or Avi, but then I heard footsteps and voices coming down the hall. Guests. In my panic, all I could think was, no one will believe me. They'll think I was in on it with her. I just saw the open door to your parents' suite. I thought I could just duck in, hide it somewhere safe, and find Avi quietly after the guests had passed. I didn't want to cause a scene. She looked at Olivia, her eyes pleading for belief. I know it was stupid. I should have just yelled, but I was so scared. Scared of your father. Scared of losing the job that's keeping my son alive. So I went into the closet. It felt like the safest place. I was just about to put it in a drawer when your father found me. Tears streamed down her face, now silent and hot. He didn't even let me speak. He looked at me like I was nothing. Less than nothing. Olivia walked over and, without thinking, knelt down and took Brenda's hands in her own. They were the strong, capable hands of a nurse, now trembling. I believe you, Brenda, Olivia said, her own voice, thick with emotion. I believe every word. And I'm going to fix this. My father, he's going to fix this. As she looked from Brenda's tear-streaked face to the pale, sleeping boy in the hospital bed, Olivia Caldwell felt a new kind of fire ignite within her. It was no longer just about clearing a good woman's name. It was about fighting for a life her father, in his blind arrogance, had nearly destroyed. Olivia returned to the mansion with a storm raging inside her. The opulent silence of the grand foyer, which had once felt comforting, now felt obscene. Every piece of art, every polished surface, seemed to mock the quiet desperation she had just witnessed in Brenda's apartment. She went directly to the security office. Avi, I need the guest list from the gala, and I need everything you have on Penelope Van Doren. Financials, recent activity, anything. Avi, seeing the look of steely determination in her eyes, a look that was pure Vincent Caldwell, didn't argue. Within an hour, he had a file for her. It painted a grim picture. Penelope's family trust was nearly depleted. She had massive credit card debt, a second mortgage on her Park Avenue apartment, and was being privately sued by 2 different luxury brands for non-payment. She was, to put it, plainly broke and desperate to maintain the illusion of wealth. The final piece of the puzzle was the security footage from the mansion's exterior gates. Olivia had Avi scan for Penelope's car leaving. They found it. She left barely 10 minutes after her encounter with Olivia in the hallway, long before the public accusation of Brenda. It was the behavior of someone fleeing the scene of a crime. Armed with motive and a timeline, Olivia knew what she had to do. Confronting Penelope had to be handled delicately. A direct accusation would be met with denial. She needed leverage. She found Penelope at a quiet cafe on Madison Avenue, trying to look nonchalant while nursing a single cappuccino for over an hour. Olivia slid into the seat opposite her, her demeanor calm and direct. "Hello, Penelope," Olivia said. Penelope jumped, startled. "Olivia, darling, what a surprise." Her smile was brittle. "We need to talk about my mother's necklace," Olivia said, her voice low. The color drained from Penelope's face. I heard what happened. That poor Maid. Just awful. The camera in the upstairs corridor has a 90-second blind spot." Penelope Olivia continued watching her carefully. But the sound is on a separate server. It records continuously. Our audio tech is filtering it right now. I'm sure that in all that ambient noise, he'll be able to isolate the sound of a necklace with a very distinct, heavy clasp hitting the marble floor. It was a complete bluff. There was no audio tech. But Penelope didn't know that. Her composure shattered. Her eyes darted around the cafe looking for an escape. "And then there's the matter of your financials," Olivia pressed on her voice, devoid of judgment, stating facts. "My father is a major shareholder in the bank that holds your mortgage. He tends to get very protective when he feels his family has been wronged. A public accusation of theft, followed by an aggressive foreclosure. It would be so messy for you." Penelope crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her perfectly made-up face. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was just going to borrow it. Wear it to one event, get my picture taken, secure a new investor for my lifestyle brand. I was going to put it back before anyone noticed. I panicked. When I was in the closet, I heard someone coming. I ran. It must have fallen out of my bag." The confession was pathetic, a story of vanity and desperation. Olivia felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the image of David Jackson lying in his hospital bed. "You are going to come with me, and you are going to tell my father exactly what you just told me," Olivia stated. It wasn't a request. An hour later, Olivia stood before her father in his vast, silent study. Penelope Van Doren was with her, weeping quietly in a chair by the door. Father Olivia said, her voice ringing with an authority he had never heard from her before. "You made a mistake." She laid it all out. The blind spot, Brenda's story, Avi's discovery of her picking up the necklace, Penelope's desperate financial situation, and finally Penelope's tearful, full confession. Vincent Caldwell listened, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He looked from his daughter to the pathetic, sobbing woman in the chair. He replayed the events in his head, the accusation, the public humiliation, his own righteous fury. The entire edifice of his certainty began to crack, groan, and then collapse into dust. He had been wrong, utterly, completely, and catastrophically wrong. He dismissed Penelope with a cold wave of his hand, telling her to get out, and that she would be hearing from his lawyers. His problem was not with her. His problem was with himself. Once they were alone, he turned to his daughter. "You've done well, Olivia. You were right. That's not all of it," Olivia said, her voice shaking slightly, now the adrenaline fading, replaced by a deep, resonant anger. "There's more you need to know about the woman you publicly destroyed." And then she told him everything. She told him about Brenda's life as a pediatric nurse. She told him about her husband, who had died a hero. And she told him about David. She described the small apartment, the hospital bed, the IV drip, the beeping monitor. She told him about the acute myeloid leukemia, the desperate search for a bone marrow match, and the fact that the job Brenda had been so terrified of losing was the only thing keeping her son's treatment going. "You didn't just fire a maid," Father Olivia finished, her voice raw with emotion. "You may have just handed a 10-year-old boy a death sentence." Vincent staggered back, as if he'd been physically struck. He collapsed into his leather chair, the air leaving his lungs. For the first time in his life, the numbers on his screens, the market reports, the empire he had built it all, seemed like meaningless garbage. He looked at the portrait of his wife, Caroline, that hung over the fireplace. She was smiling, her eyes full of the warmth and empathy he so sorely lacked. The gala had been in her name. The foundation was for children's health. And he, in his blind arrogance, had trampled over the very values she held most dear. He had humiliated a woman who was a mirror of his wife's own strength and devotion, a mother willing to do anything for her child. The regret, when it finally hit him, was not a quiet stream, but a tidal wave. It was a crushing, physical weight that threatened to pull him under. He looked at his hands, the hands that had grabbed Brenda's arm, that signed multi-billion-dollar deals, and saw only the instruments of a terrible, terrible cruelty. He had seen an employee, a variable, a potential thief. He had failed to see a human being. He had failed to see a mother. And in doing so, he had failed the memory of his wife and everything she ever stood for. The silence in the study was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Vincent Caldwell, a man accustomed to commanding rooms and bending markets to his will, was utterly adrift. The face of the weeping socialite, the triumphant headlines, his own booming voice on the staircase, it all replayed in his mind, not as a memory of justice, but as a film of his own monstrous failure. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room, though his daughter was still standing there watching him. His first impulse was that of a man who solved problems with money. "I'll fix it," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of its old command. "I'll reinstate her. Double her salary. Triple it. I'll write her a check." A check, Olivia's voice, was laced with disbelief and disappointment. "You think a check can fix this? You stood in front of hundreds of people, our friends the media, and you branded her a thief. You didn't just fire her, you annihilated her dignity. You can't write a check big enough to buy that back." The truth of her words hit him harder than the initial revelation. He had committed the sin, but the currency of his world money was worthless here. This required a different kind of payment, one he was wholly unfamiliar with. It required humility. He spent the rest of the day in a fog. He cancelled all his meetings. He ignored the incessant pinging of his phone. He sat in his study, the portrait of Carolyn seeming to watch him with sorrowful eyes. He imagined her seeing him on that staircase, her disappointment, her shame. He had built a foundation in her name to save children, and in a fit of pique, he had potentially doomed one. The irony was a blade twisting in his gut. The next morning he did something he hadn't done in years. He drove himself. He took not the sleek Maybach, but a nondescript sedan from the garage, and navigated the city streets toward Brenda's address. He carried a cashier's check for $250,000 in his breast pocket, a foolish, clumsy gesture he now realized, but he didn't know what else to do. When he knocked on the door of apartment 4B, Brenda answered. Her face was pale and drawn, but when she saw him, her exhaustion was instantly replaced by a guarded defensive anger. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice cold. She made no move to open the security chain. "Brenda." "Mrs. Jackson," he began, his own voice sounding foreign and uncertain. I have come to apologize. I was wrong. Completely and inexcusably wrong. I know everything." "You know everything," she shot back, a spark of fire in her tired eyes. "Do you know what it's like to watch your child waste away while you scrub other people's floors? Do you know what it's like to have your son see a video of his mother being called a thief on the internet?" Vincent flinched. He hadn't even considered that. The digital footprint of his accusation was permanent. "I want to make it right," he said, his voice pleading. He fumbled in his pocket and slid the check through the small gap in the door. "This is for you. For David. For his treatment. Please." Brenda looked down at the check on the floor, then back up at him, her expression hardening into something unbreakable. "My son is not a charity case, Mr. Caldwell, and my dignity is not for sale." She slid the check back out with her foot. "I don't want your money. I want you to go away. You've done enough damage." With that, she closed the door, The finality of the click was like a judgment. Vincent stood in the hallway stunned. He had been dismissed. His power, his wealth, his influence, it meant nothing to the woman behind that door. He had offered her a fortune that could solve all her problems, and she had rejected it. Because he had taken something from her that was more valuable, and he hadn't even begun to understand how to give it back. He walked back to his car, defeated. The rejection was more profound than any failed business deal. It was a rejection of his entire being, of the way he saw and moved through the world. For the first time, he understood. An apology wasn't a transaction. It was a process. Redemption wasn't something you could buy. It had to be earned. He returned to the mansion and went straight to his office. But this time, he wasn't looking at market data. He picked up the phone and called the one man whose expertise was not in money, but in miracles, Dr. Robert Miller, the head of oncology at the hospital his foundation was the primary benefactor of. "Robert, it's Vincent Caldwell," he said, his voice urgent. "I need your help. I'm sending you the file of a 10-year-old boy named David Jackson. He has acute myeloid leukemia and needs a bone marrow transplant. I want you to find him a match, and I want you to do it yesterday." He paused, taking a breath. "And Robert, mobilize everything. Use every resource the Caldwell Foundation has at its disposal. I don't care what it costs. Scour the global registries. Set up donor drives. Fund a dedicated research team if you have to. Whatever it takes. This boy is going to live." Hanging up the phone, Vincent felt the first faint glimmer of a new kind of purpose. He couldn't undo the humiliation he had caused Brenda Jackson. He couldn't erase the headlines or the videos, but he could fight for her son. He could pour his vast resources, his influence, and his ferocious, single-minded will, not into acquiring another company, but into saving one small, precious life. It wouldn't be forgiveness. It wouldn't be a solution, but it would be a start. It was the only thing he could do. Vincent Caldwell attacked the problem of finding a donor for David Jackson with the same relentless ferocity he applied to a hostile takeover. The Caldwell name, once a tool for accumulating wealth, was now a battering ram against medical bureaucracy and statistical improbability. He funded a series of high-profile bone marrow donor drives across the city, plastering advertisements on buses and billboards. He personally called the CEOs of rival corporations not to discuss mergers, but to implore them to get their employees tested and registered. He leveraged his media connections, transforming the narrative. The story was no longer about a thieving maid. It was about the citywide desperate search for a hero to save a little boy's life. In all the coverage, he insisted that Brenda be portrayed as what she was: a dedicated mother and a former nurse, a pillar of strength. He was slowly publicly rewriting the story he had so cruelly authored. Brenda watched all of this from a distance, with a mixture of suspicion and bewildered hope. She still wouldn't take his calls. She refused the private nurses and the gourmet meal deliveries he sent to her apartment. But she couldn't stop the wave of action he had set in motion. Every day, news reports showed lines of people waiting to get swabbed, all for a boy they had never met. It was a miracle orchestrated by the very man who had caused her so much pain. Weeks turned into a month. David's condition was deteriorating. The doctors at New York Presbyterian, now personally overseen by Dr. Miller, were doing everything they could. But time was running out. The weight of it all was crushing Vincent. Every night he'd get the daily report, and every night the news was the same: no match. For all his money and power, he was helpless against the simple, brutal math of genetics. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. An international database flagged a potential match, a 9-10 marker match, which was promising from a construction worker in Dublin, Ireland. The man, a father of 3, named Sean O'Connell, was a confirmed and willing donor. The logistical machine went into overdrive. Vincent chartered a private medical jet. He had a team of specialists fly to Dublin to facilitate the donation, ensuring every protocol was handled with an urgency that bordered on manic. 24 hours later, a small insulated container holding the precious life-saving stem cells was on its way across the Atlantic. Vincent didn't call Brenda. He went to the hospital himself. He found her in the waiting room outside the pediatric ICU where David was being prepped for the transplant. She looked up as he approached her face, a mask of exhaustion, fear, and a hope she was too scared to embrace. He didn't offer platitudes or apologies. He just sat in the chair next to her, a silent, awkward vigil. For a long time they said nothing. Finally Brenda spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Why, she asked, not looking at him. Why are you doing all of this? Vincent stared at his hands, the silence stretching between them. When my wife was sick, he began, his voice raspy, with an emotion he rarely allowed himself. It was very fast, aggressive. For the last 2 weeks there was nothing anyone could do. All the money in the world, and I couldn't stop it. I just had to watch. Powerless. It was the most profound failure of my life. He finally turned to look at her. Until I met you. What I did to you, to your son, was a different kind of failure. It wasn't powerlessness. It was an abuse of power. It was a moral bankruptcy that I didn't even know I was capable of. I can never take back what I said on that staircase, Brenda. I can never erase the humiliation I caused you. It will haunt me for the rest of my days. He took a shaky breath. But I couldn't just watch again. I couldn't be powerless while your son. I had to do something. Not for forgiveness, but because it was the only human thing to do. Because your fight for your son reminded me of everything I should have been for my wife, for my daughter, for everyone. A tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. I'm doing this because you and David deserve a life, and I am the man who almost took that away. In that moment, Brenda saw past the billionaire, past the accuser. She saw a broken man, grieving and filled with a regret so vast it had reshaped him. Her own tears began to fall, tears of fear, of relief, of a strange, complicated empathy for the man beside her. The transplant was a success. The weeks of recovery were grueling, but David Jackson, with the heart of a fighter, pulled through. His body accepted the new cells. The cancer went into remission. On the day David was finally discharged from the hospital, Vincent was there. He had arranged a press conference outside the main entrance. When Brenda emerged, holding the hand of her son, who was wearing a surgical mask but had a triumphant light in his eyes, the cameras flashed. Vincent stepped to the microphone. His voice was firm but devoid of its old arrogance. Several months ago in my home, I made a grievous error, he said to the assembled press. I publicly accused this woman, Brenda Jackson, of a crime she didn't commit. My actions were born of arrogance, grief, and a failure to see the incredible human being standing in front of me. I am here today, not only to celebrate the recovery of her brave son David, but to offer my most profound and public apology to Mrs. Jackson. She is a woman of unparalleled integrity and strength, and I will spend the rest of my life attempting to atone for my mistake. He then announced the launch of a new, multi-billion-dollar branch of his foundation to be called Caroline's Promise. Its sole purpose would be to cover all non-medical expenses for families with critically ill children, rent, food, transportation, lost wages, so that no parent would ever have to choose between their job and their child's bedside. And he announced its first director. This foundation, he said, looking directly at Brenda, will require a leader with experience, compassion, and an unbreakable spirit. It would be my honor if Brenda Jackson would agree to run it. Brenda stared at him, stunned, as the crowd of reporters erupted in questions. She looked at David, who was smiling up at her. She looked at Vincent Caldwell, who was offering her not charity, not a payoff, but a purpose. A way to use her pain and her experience as a nurse and a mother to help thousands of others. It was an act of redemption, so thorough, so complete that it left no room for bitterness. She took a step forward, her hand still holding her son's, and for the first time, she smiled. It was a new beginning, born from the ashes of a terrible end. That day, Vincent Caldwell didn't just save a life. He rediscovered his own humanity. Brenda Jackson didn't just get her son back. She found a new calling, transforming her personal struggle into a national beacon of hope. Their story serves as a powerful real-life reminder that our worst mistakes do not have to define us. It is what we do in the face of our profound regret that truly reveals our character. It teaches us that empathy is a currency more valuable than any stock, and a true apology is not just spoken in words, but is built through selfless action. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the most shattered lives can be rebuilt into something even stronger and more beautiful than before. If this story of regret and redemption moved you, and if you believe in the power of second chances, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that touch the heart. Let us know in the comments. What to you is the most important part of a genuine apology?